well, that's what we'll cover. That's what we cover in the south, which is more relevant to this conversation. So we've got quite a lot of people, and we're spread across the two areas which are highlighted on the map on the screen. And we're basically, our plan is to support the transition to net zero. So that's about connecting electric vehicles and connecting heat pumps and allowing distributed energy resources, or DER, to connect to our network. So to help support that, we're just about to go into our ED2 price control. ED2 stands for Electricity Distribution 2. That's essentially how we're governed by Ofgem. And essentially we have to put forward our plan every 5 years, and then we get given a certain amount of money to deliver those key outcomes. So we're just about to start ED2 in April 2023. So we're currently mobilizing to get there. And these are the key goals we want to achieve in that period until 2028. We have essentially 4 overarching themes: a safe and responsive network, a valued and trusted service to our customers and communities, accelerate progress towards net zero world, and that altogether has benefit of impact on society. So that's essentially the themes we have here. And you can see some of the key stuff we're covering across as well, such as ensuring resilience of the network as people rely on it more and more, making sure that we can reduce the amount of power outages, and particularly off the back of some of the big storms which have come through this winter. Making sure we get good customer satisfaction and we're supporting customers in fuel poverty, and then allowing for the connection of electric vehicles and heat pumps, alongside ensuring that we're cutting our own business carbon footprint. So that's kind of the background. In terms of the actual information, I've decided to summarize the 4 bits of information I'm going to cover on this slide. I've already sent Liz a PDF of this, and we'll circulate that. These are clickable links, essentially, so you'll be able to click through to them when you get the slides. But there's essentially 4 of these, and I'll explain each of the abbreviations. And I've gone into more detail of each of those, which have them broken down, so don't worry. The DFES is the distribution future energy scenarios. And essentially, that is where we project all the loads for different technology types across our networks. I'll go into more detail of that in a second. Then we've got the Network Development Plan, or NDP, and that's essentially where we take those projections and we compare and contrast them to the impact on the network. So that's giving us a headroom for both new demand connections and new generation connections. Then we've got the Embedded Capacity Register, or the ECR. That is a log which is updated every month, where there is connected generation and accepted generation across our network. And then finally, we've got a heat map, essentially sharing some of that information in an easy to digest fashion on an interactive map, essentially. I should point out that all the information here is evolving and it's getting more detailed, and we're sharing more and more data about what we're doing as well. So what I tell you through here is only going to improve over the coming months, and certainly when we get into April next year, where we've got a lot more funding to do this, there'll be even more. So let me jump straight into the DFES. So we've partnered with Regen on this, and they did a lot of the engagement with our local authorities and the groups around the organisation, to ensure that the data is being collated. And fundamentally, it's based around the national grid future energy scenarios, where they project for the whole of the UK how many EVs, how many charging points, how many developments, how many new industrial sites are likely to go across the UK. We felt that we actually needed more localized ones, so we actually broke down, using the same framework, how to do that. So that's essentially the process we went through. Just to explain what a scenario actually is, these are set by National Grid, and essentially they have created 4 scenarios, 3 of which get us to net zero. And that essentially allows us to move from something which is a steady progression where we don't actually change very much in terms of our behaviors. We don't actually hit the net zero target because actually just rate of change is too slow. And the lack of, and also the level of ambition and the amount of spread and societal change isn't materialized either. And that's the one down the bottom here, which is steady progression. Then we jump onto the two sort of middle ambitioning ones. And these are very similar in terms of the amount of decarbonisation which happens, which is this along here. They're split between consumer transformation and system transformation. And the fundamental difference here is the level of societal change. As community groups, I'm sure that your preference would be here, where there's lots of people out on the ground changing what they do, lots of EVs, lots of heat pumps, lots of communal change, lots of distributed energy. And essentially everything's done ground up. It's a very grassroots energy transition. Down here, in system transformation, it's more around the fact that it's been driven centrally by governmental change, large companies, that side of things. So it's more central. So they're the fundamental differences there. And there's a very different range of technology types that are considered in both of those. Then finally, with leading the way, that's where everyone changes everything, and it's the fastest change. And we actually hit our net zero target before 1950s. Ollie, did you want to ask a question?
No, I just want to make a point. That's what we want to do, lead the way.
Okay, fair enough. So yeah, that's essentially the underlying set of scenarios which are used here. Just to give you a flavor for the types of technologies which we're considering, in terms of distributed energy generation, we've got essentially solar, wind, wave, tidal flow, water run. We've got fossil fuels as well, because obviously they're going to still be a material part of our energy system until they're phased out. We've also got things like AD and waste-driven stuff and biomass and all that stuff too, and battery storage. So they're all the sorts of technologies we consider. Then on from terms of demand, the low carbon, we've got EVs across all the different types. We've actually broken them down by different types, the charges as well, and different business cases associated with them, and the different electric heating capabilities along with domestic rooftop solar, which is essentially considered in this as a negative demand, because essentially it removes domestic demand rather than a larger generation. The other things we bear in mind is development. So obviously there's lots and lots of development in new homes, but equally lots of development in terms of new industrial sites and commercial sites. And we liaise very closely with the local authorities to understand where those developments are going to go and where they're going to be located. And then finally, looking at some of the other big technologies. So hydrogen is quite a big one at the moment, where we're trying to understand exactly what sort of uptake there'll be and what sort of how that will change in terms of the heat transition, but how it could be used in industrial processes as well. And then finally, data centers. They're popping up all over the place. Data centers are pretty fundamental in terms of the amount of demand on the network, but equally they have quite big heat loads as well. So there's different technologies can be used to help reduce the impact in terms of the amount of energy they use. So a whole variety of bits there. In terms of the reports, there's a few bits and pieces on our website. So I'm just going to quickly flash up the website so you can see where to find these. So we've got a website here, and Liz should be able to drop this into the chat box. This is basically talking about smarter delivery of distribution system operator. We've got some information about DSA, but if you scroll down to beneath here, we've got the rollout of LCT technologies. That's where we actually project heat pumps and EVs down to a local substation level. That's very, very granular, so it's worth having a look at that. But specifically for this group, going to the England things, you can bring up the report for 2021 under this link, and that looks like this. So I've pulled up one of the maps, which is in southern England, which is the consumer transformation, because I thought that was the most relevant, and it gives you a sort of level of granularity in terms of where the technology development will be and some of the highlights. Very detailed report. It's 150 odd pages, but you can zoom into the relevant bits on where each of these are. And it breaks down all the different technologies and stuff like that. So it gives you a lot of information to digest and a lot of indications, which is great. It's written by Regen. I've noticed someone from Regen's just actually joined. So it's done in a very simple language to hopefully make it very easy to understand. So jumping back to the next report, this is getting a step more complicated because they are just the projections of either the amount of power or the amount of numbers of systems or technologies across all our different parts of our network. This is where we actually cross-reference that in terms of the amount of power on the impact of the network. And so specifically here, we start to understand the impact of the network, where the capacity, where the headroom is, and basically really give an indication of where there's potential to connect. It's worth noting that there's several reports here. We've got a methodology report where we talk about exactly how we've used it, the methodologies, the assumptions. That's really important. But then we actually have a report which goes down to each grid supply point, exactly where there is capacity everywhere. And I'll show you that in a second. And then finally, there is a large Excel spreadsheet in terms of the headroom, and that's down to each primary substation. So that tells you for each primary substation, which would feed about 3,000 to 4,000 people, what the impact of all those different technologies will be in terms of capacity from next year all the way through to 2050. It's worth noting that when we get past 2030, we do it every 5 years, I think. Rather than every single year, but for the next 10 years, we do it every year. That gives you a really granular look, and I'm going to quickly flash up that on the website as well. So that would be, hang on, let me get to the right bit. That'll be under capacity information. So we've got a few bits and pieces here, but if you scroll down to network development plan, we've got the various reports here, which I just described. Your assumptions, and then the SEPD is the ones which do with South, which stands for Southern Electricity Power Distribution. Scottish Hydroelectric Power Distribution is our Scottish colleagues, so that's less relevant for you guys. So essentially the top three. It's worth noting in terms of the report, this is slightly more technical, but it gives you a summary. I've picked up Bramley because that's relatively local to me, which covers the Basingstoke area where I'm based. Exactly where it covers and where there's developments and where there's things. And it actually talks about what we're going to be putting in terms of ways to extend our capacity over the next few years as well. How much capacity will be released and when it's going to kick in. So it goes into a bit of detail, and you can see it does it per area. So this is down on the south coast. So it's done alphabetically, so you can scroll through to the physical areas where we're interested. The other bit is looking at the actual headroom. So this is the big spreadsheet I was talking about. And again, it's broken down by grid supply point, or GSP, bulk supply point, which is the level beneath that again, and then down to the primary substation, which was that 3,000 to 4,000 people. And that basically shows you for each of the scenarios, so consumer transformation leading the way, steady progression, and for system transformation and steady progression, what the headroom for each of those scenarios going forwards for each year, essentially, as you can see across here. And we've got that both for demand and for generation. So we've basically broken that down to give it a really easy, whether it's green or red, where there's likely to be capacity on the network across those areas, to give you a good indication of what the capacity now will be, but also in the future years. So now we move on to the final sort of report as such, which is embedded capacity register. This is quite a simple register, although it has a lot of detail. And it basically shows where we have generation connections across our network. It's worth noting that at the moment we publish anything above 1 megawatt, but in a few months' time, maybe even as soon as next month, that will drop down to 50 kilowatts. So that includes all of the connected generation, but also all the accepted generation, who've basically people who've put a connection offer in and have had that accepted. So you can see the pipeline of people who want to connect. It tells them where the location is, it tells them what the export is, and actually it even says the address and the grid coordinates. So it's got a lot of detail there. I'm quickly going to show you the website again and show you the actual register itself. So this one is quite straightforward. You go to the embedded capacity register and you can download it here. And it's got a little bit of info about the register beneath it. This is one of the things which you do plan to put in a map in due course, but we've not actually done that yet. Along actually with all of these, we plan to put them in the mapping in due course. This, in terms of how it looks, is not particularly friendly looking spreadsheet, but it has a lot of detail. It actually has the MPAN, which is essentially the identifier of the meter. And then it has the address. It has information around where it is physically, the technology type, where it's connected, and if you've got multiple technology types, it accommodates that. In terms of the definitions, if you looked at here, it actually summarizes exactly what each cell, each row considers, and a description of what each one it is. So it gives you a lot of information in the sheet itself on how to interpret that information. Also coming in later on this year, we're going to make this machine readable so it can be pulled in to other computer systems automatically using an API. I would tell you what API stands for, but it's gone out of my head at the moment. Basically, it's a way of a computer sucking information in automatically. So now into our final bit is the map. This basically summarizes some of the information I've already showed you and allows you to explore it in a geospatial way. It has information about all the constraints across our substations, and it also shows where EV chargers are currently. And I'll quickly show you how that looks as well, which is here. Hopefully it will load. Essentially, this map is a visualization of our static assets, so our substations. It doesn't show the lines. Oh, that's frustrating. Bear with me a moment. Tell you what, let me try reloading this. Actually, if I try going from here, that opened. Nope. There we go. Let's see if I open the map from this one. So you can get to the map through the capacity information link as well.
Stephen, if that that link works, can you stick the link in the chat box and then other people can link directly?
Yeah, of course.
Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, here we are. Excellent. So you go in, you have to accept the terms and conditions to use it, but essentially it's an interactive map. It basically has a key up here about where you've got different generation capability. So both have generation and network capacity, which is essentially demand capacity. And it allows you to zoom in essentially and see where you've got constraints across all the substations and stuff like that. So yeah, I suspect it's because I'm presenting it's going a little bit slow, but yeah, it tells you exactly where there's constraints, etc. So you can explore this, and then when you zoom down into a local enough level, see this little car which is grayed up at the moment, that will then show you where all the charge points are. So hopefully, as that was a quick rattle through, I don't know, Liz, are you doing questions now or at the end after everyone's presentations?
I think we should do questions at the end, because it might be that the other presentations answer some questions or provoke further questions. So we'll wait till after Ian and Katrina have spoken and then do questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you very much, Steve. So I'm going to hand over to Ian D now, and do please keep putting questions or observations in the chat box. You'll see that I'm just talking while Ian gets his presentation ready. I have put the links in so that you can all link and play with the links while people are talking, because often that will also provoke questions. So handing over to Ian now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll just sort my screen out and hopefully everyone will be able to see it. That seemed to be doing it. Hopefully everyone can see that first slide. Yeah, it's good actually to see a good crowd and some familiar faces. So good to see Ollie again and Kat and Liz, obviously. But I'm pretty sure Steve and I have worked together before on Project Leo with Oxfordshire County Council. So probably a few years ago now, but I think I recognise the face and the voice. So yeah, really good. What I wanted to try and do was sort of go into the data mapping exercise that we've undertaken for East Hampshire, but keep it quite high level. So I won't really get into the technical elements of it, but sort of show you how the outputs were created, show you what the outputs look like, and show you what the outputs kind of enable, really. And just to give you a sense of how this data can really support the community energy projects in a number of ways. But I think first, as Ollie mentioned, you know, I'm new to geospatial insight, but not new to the kind of sector. I was the CEO of a company called Energio, and Energio were recently acquired by Geospatial Insight to become their dedicated climate division. So Energio are now fully part of Geospatial Insight, and we are labelled GSI Sustainability. That happened earlier this year, and really what happened there was Geospatial Insight were formed in 2012. They are using a lot of analytical techniques, machine learning, artificial intelligence, alongside geospatial data, but for applications that aren't climate related. So a lot of work in the insurance and the finance sectors, and really they were really looking to expand their capability into climate. Energio already had that capability, and Geospatial Insight were a company that we'd worked with in the past. So it was a really nice marriage, actually. We all kind of know each other and got on anyway. So bringing the two businesses together was really sensible. In the climate division specifically, what we're focusing on is how to take geospatial data and technology. A really simple example of that would be satellite imagery. And how can we take that data alongside those sort of contemporary analytical techniques and enhance a stakeholder's ability to make decisions on how to deploy low carbon technology? Where can it go, and what are the benefits? And the benefits, obviously we want to know what the environmental benefits are, how much CO2 are we going to save, but the financial benefits of an installation are absolutely key as well, because we know we need to do this, we want to do this, but it's difficult to justify it to people if the financial numbers don't stack up alongside the environmental. So that's been a key part of what we're doing. We've got a multi-sector client base. We cut our teeth really in the local authority arena. So that's been our kind of core client base over the years, and you can see some of the people we've worked with there. But you'll also sort of see some private sector companies up there, and we do extensively work with the private sector, predominantly in the EV space and the solar space, and they use us as effectively a business development tool. We can help them identify which roofs are the most suitable for solar, and then they can use that to plan their sales activities. Whilst I'll be talking about solar predominantly today, we do lots of other types of analyses. So EV is a big part of what we're doing at the moment. We've done 3 electric vehicle charging projects with Oxfordshire County Council, Bournemouth, Milton Keynes, East Lothian, even in Bangalore. So that's a really big part of the business for us. We are a geospatial company, so we make maps, but not in the traditional sense, is always the way I kind of try to put it across to people. But because of our use of technology like satellite imagery, we are funded and supported quite extensively by both the UK and the European space agencies, which is nice to have that backing. And the European Space Agency, to be honest, have been absolutely fantastic, because post-Brexit, they didn't have to sort of maintain that relationship with the UK, but they have done, and it's really helped our industry and certainly helped Geospatial Insight continue to develop these kind of products and services. So sort of chatting with Ollie in particular, sort of prior to doing this, we were sort of thinking, well, what do we actually want to achieve with this? Yes, we want to create some data, we want to deliver some data, but why? What are the kind of drivers behind wanting this kind of information, or wanting to go down the data-driven route rather than using local knowledge, using Google Earth, or whatever it might have been that people were using traditionally? I think these are some of the key points. If there's others, Ollie, that I've missed off here, throw them in the chat. I think having your perspective on this, I'm coming at this very much from the data provider's point of view, and these are my interpretation. But really, actually identifying a project in the first place can be difficult. Like we say, there might be that reliance on local knowledge. People might be sort of panning and zooming around Google Earth. The thought being, there's got to be a quicker and a better way of doing this. Also, as we know, if you can get 3, 4, 5, 6 projects on the go at the same time, it often facilitates that process, because you can do lots of things at once and cut down on the admin, cut down on the conversations. So looking at our approach to this, it was, how do we facilitate project aggregation? How can we identify opportunities near to each other that you could potentially join up and make more effective? Accelerate the intelligence gathering. Like we say, lots of this work is done manually, and reduce the surveying costs. If you're doing things manually, it takes time, it takes effort, and doing that in a digital world and trying to automate some of that process can reduce those costs. But also, we know that the people on the ground have got really good local knowledge. The work we've done in East Hants, we've demoed it with Pecan and with Alton Energy, and their local knowledge is absolutely phenomenal. So actually taking their local knowledge and putting it alongside this kind of empirically observed information creates a much more holistic data set that has more value than just one or the other on its own. And I think, as you'll see, and I really wanted to demonstrate this, having maps is a great way of communicating information to people. If you're trying to describe something, or you're sending something text-based to somebody, there's an interpretation they've got to make from it. If you show it on a map, you can see it. It's kind of almost empirical. So it helps to communicate what you're trying to achieve, what the opportunity is. And also, as we'll see later, we wanted to reduce the end user's need to host, manage software and data. As you know, some community groups might be quite happy with data. They might be quite tech savvy. Others might not be. And really, we wanted to create something that was inclusive, so anybody of any kind of technical standing could access it and utilize it and benefit from it. So that was our kind of almost our starting point for the data process. And then there was our method, and I won't go into this in detail because the guys out there that were saying we need to sort of outline the acronyms, I'd be here all day otherwise. So I'll just give you a very sort of high level sort of overview of how we approach this. The first was to use non-intrusive techniques. And by non-intrusive, I mean, how can we get as much information about a site, a place, an asset, a feature without actually going there, without having to be on site? So that sort of chimes back, as I was saying, to the use of digital mapping data to satellite imagery. In our industry, we call it remote sensing. Acquiring information about a site without actually being there in person. So, how can we use non-intrusive techniques? How can we automate the analysis? How can we take some data sets in, and from that, produce an output without having to manually interpret it or manually push buttons, and how do we sort of take that manual weight out of the process. Scalability is obviously key. You know, doing these types of analyses for a small area, you know, it might be a single parish is fine, but how do you then scale that up and undertake the same analysis for a district, a county, a region, without that process becoming more complex, more costly, more time consuming? So that was a key part of this. You know, we don't just want to be able to do a parish here and a parish there. Actually, having that data as a wide area source facilitates that project identification process, and you can sort of spot between different parishes, between different districts, projects, and try to aggregate them and enhance that communication element too. Extract key characteristics, and by characteristics I mean, what are we trying to look at when we're determining whether a site is suitable for solar? If you think of a roof, you know, pitch, aspect, orientation, the irradiation it's exposed to, all of those things, we want to be able to extract them. And then if you think of where you want to put ground mount solar, obviously the land use, what's it currently being used for? Is it in a conservation area? Is it on a floodplain? All of those kind of types of information, we need to be able to extract those in order to help our decision-making process as to whether a site is going to be good for solar or not. And as I've said, calculate both the financial and the environmental information. Saying that we can get, you know, 30 kilowatts on a roof that will save X tons of CO2 a year is fantastic. But what's the financial payback for it, and how do you kind of monetize it as well? Because as you know, generating revenue from these projects is key, because that's the reinvestment pathway to do more projects. So that's a key part of what we're doing as well. And obviously these projects aren't just on the ground for 6 months, a year, 2 years, they're on the ground for 20, 25 years. So actually, what's the lifetime benefit of a solar installation? It's nice to know what happens in year one. You know, the short-term view is great because that's kind of your immediate justification, but actually understanding over a 20-year period what the benefits of a solar installation would be, it is also key. So that was our approach. You know, automate the analysis, do it non-intrusively, make it scalable, and make sure that we include the financial benefits as well. So I think I've probably gone over the boring bits now, probably show some pictures, which is a hell of a lot more interesting. So this is East Hants, and what you can see on screen in pink are all the land parcels in East Hants that we assessed. There's around 6,500, I think, off the top of my head, and you'll see there are gaps in that. I know those of you familiar with it will say, well, the South Downs National Park is included in there, and I'll come on to that shortly, so don't panic. But the exclusions in there are areas that we've sort of said, well, look, you're not going to go and put solar farms on a green space in the middle of an urban area. You're not going to go and put solar farms, you know, you're not going to get woodland removed to put a solar farm in. You're probably not going to repurpose an existing golf course for solar. So we've extracted some sites and kind of excluded them in a first phase assessment. And then the rest of the analysis kind of goes through and looks at the suitability for the sites. But what that lets us do is, once we've kind of analysed each land parcel, is to attribute it with a solar capacity. So each of these parcels goes through a process of filtering against other data. So we look at, is it, what's the pitch and the aspect of the site? How big is the site? Yeah, what's the sort of irradiance that the site might be exposed to? And by calculating all that information, we can come up with a capacity. And we use some generic rules of thumb on you know, megawatts per hectare, or per, you know, how many acres per megawatt to come up with that capacity. But you can see instantly that visual element of using the map. You can spot straight away land parcels that would be much more beneficial or much more better for higher capacity than others. And you can see where one field parcel is next to another field parcel. And actually, if you put the two of them together, you might make a much more beneficial solar array than if you would just use an individual field parcel. So by undertaking that analysis and presenting it in this way, we're sort of hot spotting where the opportunities are, but also giving you the opportunity to see where 2 or 3 opportunities could be combined to make a bigger opportunity. What I wanted to do now was kind of zoom in a little bit and actually show you the data in a bit more detail. So I've sort of highlighted this land parcel here where my mouse is at the moment, but I wanted to show you all the data points that we put in there. We put in what the land use is from a couple of sources. So, Ordnance Survey say that this is agricultural land, but there's a land use data set we use created by the European Space Agency called CAREEN, which goes a little bit more detail. So it says, it's non-irrigated arable land. This particular site isn't in a flood zone. It's not in a designated green belt. And as you can see, it's not in any of the kind of conservation designations as well. So you can sort of start to think about that planning element too. Is it going to be difficult to get planning for that? Well, it's not in a conservation area and it's not at risk of flooding. It's not on the green belt. So all that information is included here, and it's sort of at the fingertips. But then we wanted to kind of go a little bit further and say, well, actually, we need to be a bit more detailed here. And obviously, knowing how big a field is and whether it's in a conservation area, etc., is great. But actually, what's on the field or what's in the field? So we started to look at, are there buildings within the field parcel? Because whilst it might be an agricultural parcel, there could be buildings in it. You drive past fields and you see things in them. So we wanted to kind of say, actually, is it kind of a blank slate, or are there some considerations on the site? So this particular field parcel has no buildings in it, but the field parcels adjacent to it do. That would be the kind of the urban area here. There's no water on that site, so there's no ponds, lakes, rivers running through it. There's no woodland on the site, but there is woodland adjacent, which is this area to the north here. So this particular site is not in a flood zone, it's not in a conservation area, there's no water on it, there's no buildings on it, there's no woodland on it. So it is, it's going to be, like we say, non-irrigated arable land. That's exactly what it is. And then we've got the measurements in hectares, the slope, so you can see it's actually quite a flat site as well, only a 4-degree slope on it. And we think you could probably get about 41 megawatt on there if it was installed to its full capacity. Obviously, we don't do the design element, so ours is an estimate. Once an engineer looks at this and takes it to the next level, they might reduce that, increase it. But as a kind of ballpark estimate, that's what we work with. So that's kind of zoomed in and having a good look at it. But having all that information at your fingertips lets you filter the data quite quickly as well. And if you remember, we talked about the South Downs National Park. Well, if we look, you can actually see that out of the kind of 6,500 field parcels we assessed, probably about 60–70% of them all fall within the South Downs National Park area. Now, I know through speaking to, I think Anna's on the call and Bill is on the call as well, through speaking to people in the area, we know the South Downs National Park are not keen to sort of let solar be installed on their land. But what we take the approach of is, actually, if we assess the potential of the national park land, but then flag that it's national park, if their policies change in future, that data already exists.
Just going to interrupt and say, because Anna asked a question, I just want to know if that answered it. Anna's question is, if a site's not suitable, how is it shown on the map?
Yeah, so we're not solar experts per se. What we do is we stack the information up and then almost let the end user filter it to find their criteria. But funny enough that Anna's actually on the call, we've just agreed to work with Winchester Council, and one of the things we're going to do is we're going to undertake a similar exercise to this, but we are going to do something a little bit different with that. We're going to work with Anna and Winchester City Council to come up with some suitability criteria. So we can undertake this analysis, and then Winchester City Council and Geospatial Insight will sit and go, okay, well, what makes a site better than another? How do we rank these sites? based on these criteria, and we are going to come up with a ranking system for Winchester, which, you know, it could be, you know, here's your top 10 sites, your top 50 sites. It could be a traffic light system where South Downs National Park is just red at the moment, and other areas are amber and other areas are green. So there's lots of different ways we can present this, rank it, prioritize it. That's not in this particular data set, but it will be in the one that we produce for Winchester, and we could take that approach with this data if we built some criteria with the end users. So yeah, absolutely possible, and will be done for Winchester.
Ian, I've got a question.
Yeah.
If you've got a specific site in mind,
yeah,
how can you interact with this data?
I'll come on to that, Ollie, if that's all right.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I don't want you to steal my thunder too soon.
Oh yeah, because I just think that's what community energy groups will be coming from, that angle. They'll have a list of projects that they'll want to plug in.
Yeah, no, that's no problem at all. I'll show you that shortly.
All right. Great.
Give this overview, and then I'll show you sort of what we've done for East Hants to kind of get stuck into the data, so to speak. That's kind of the solar suitability of land, and I wanted to sort of bring some stats out there to just sort of show you, when you've got the data, you can kind of extract this kind of information. So yeah, over 6,500 land parcels assessed, but 60% of them are in the South Downs. You know, almost all of the land outside South Downs National Park we would have said was suitable for solar based on our analysis. I think that it equates to around 14,000 football pitches worth of area that's suitable for solar in total. So a huge area. Football pitches around 7,500 square meters. You know, the total capacity in those areas is, obviously you're not going to install all of this. These are very kind of top level stats, but you know, 10,000 megawatt, which is enough to power around 4,000 homes, 4 million homes, and save sort of 730 tons of CO2 a year. So even at the very top level, those stats are able to be extracted from the data, and we can look at that, and you know that there's a lot of capacity there. Even if you only hit a percentage of that, it's going to make a massive contribution to energy in East Hants, and the community energy projects that could be taken from just a percentage of that would still be a massive achievement. So that's kind of the land side of it. I wanted to show you the rooftop side as well. So these are the urban areas we assessed. And for this project, we specifically looked at residential properties. I think we do have some of the commercial data, but I didn't have it to hand when I was doing these slides. So this is looking at the residential properties in particular. I don't know all the urban areas here, but I know Alton's at the top, Petersfield's down sort of in the middle. You guys will recognise some of the urban areas better than I as locals. But again, we went through a similar process here. How do we look at a building and extract its roof pitch, its roof aspect? We used a data set called LiDAR, which is like a 3D topographic data set to do that, and then calculate solar potential and the benefits of installing solar. So if I kind of zoom in, you kind of see I've shaded this similar to the land, but rejigged it for the rooftop. So you can sort of see I've shaded it. So you know, your 0 to 5 kilowatt installation capacity, as you would expect, is kind of on the residential areas. And as it gets bigger and bigger, you know, you get up to some of the larger blocks of flats. I think there's a school in there, and the capacity went up. If we'd have assessed the trading estate as well, most of that would probably have been in this 50 to 150 kilowatt bracket. But again, it's that visual aspect of being able to look at a town and instantly pick out where the bigger roofs are and what the opportunities might be, or to see groups of residential properties that you could have as a project and sort of aggregate it. And our data has been used for that quite a bit in other parts of the country, where, you know, looking at streets, neighbourhoods that want to kind of get solar on their roofs, and they can take that to the solar installer and get a better deal for doing kind of 50 roofs in one go rather than one roof here, one roof there. So that's, again, just a visual representation of the data, but again, what's underneath the data is the key here. So this property down here, this is my pronunciation, I don't know whether it's Giles or Giles Court, but in Alton. You can see we've said, and on this, Liz, and for everyone else listening, we do say whether or not it's suitable for solar. So yeah, we do put a suitable for solar yes, no in. You'll see this property is suitable for solar based on, based on our analysis. That's based on whether the roof has the right pitch, the right aspect, whether the roof has a solar usable area, or whether there might be a dormer on the roof, and a couple of other factors. You know, if it does have a solar suitable area on the roof, is it big enough to hold an array that's going to be beneficial to the property? So all of those things are taken into consideration. But you can see we've got, you know, roof pitch, roof aspect, the average annual irradiance over the course of the year, how many panels we think you can get on the roof, what the system size of that would be, what the system would cost, its yield, and then these financial elements coming into play as well here. So if we look here, the total benefit over 20 years for that property is over £46,000. So that's anticipated export revenue plus anticipated on-site electricity savings minus the installation costs. So that information is in there, and that's all got, we've got a calculation that over 20 years includes anticipated inflation, price rises, and so on and so forth. So that's all taken into account. So you see the CO2 savings are in there, but the financial benefits are in there as well. So we can take both of those into consideration. If I just drop down some roof stats for East Hants. In total, we assessed pretty much 45,000. Almost all of them were suitable for solar in some way, shape or form. Obviously, the size of array that they could get on the roof was different across all of that. Total usable roof space of 850,000 square meters, which is the equivalent to 120 football pitches. So again, it's a huge amount of real estate that's untapped in terms of solar generation. And over the course of 20 years, across those sort of 40,000 properties, there's £20 million worth of electricity savings every year. There's 33 tons of CO2 savings every year. And we've calculated that for those 40,000 properties suitable for solar, if they all had solar on, the total benefit would be somewhere in the region of 400 million. So it's huge amounts of financial benefit alongside huge amounts of environmental benefit that we're calculating and we're estimating. That's a quick. So yeah,
I'm just getting, as an event organizer, I'm concerned about the time because we've got loads of questions and possibly a brief presentation from Katrina. So I'm just going to encourage you to.
Yeah, that's fine. I can help you there because I'm going to sort of take Katrina's bit and show you the platform as well.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
Hopefully we'll expedite that process a bit. But that's the solar side of things. And I will show you the platform. That's a quick look at it. I'll jump onto the platform in a second. I did have another slide, but I don't know where it's gone. But yeah, I'll jump onto the platform anyway. I was just going to say that Hampshire has actually been quite a good area for us because we've just started an EV project with the Isle of Wight, where we're going to look at the demand both now and in the future for EV charging. And as we've said, through Anna and Winchester City Council, we're going to do a solar assessment similar to the land solar assessment we did for East Hants, but with some other information augmented into it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second and I'll pop something else back up then, Liz, if that's okay.
And while E&D does that, I'm just going to ask Tom Broughton. He had a couple of questions for Stephen, so perhaps while Ian's getting himself sorted.
Yeah, perfect.
I'm conscious about time, so Tom, do you want to ask your questions about SSEN of Steve?
Yeah, I guess ED2, I believe, has got a intention.
We can't hear you, Tom.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Not very well. How about we let Ian finish his presentation and I'll hand it back to you at the end of this. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, I'll whiz through this because this is we've put the data in a platform. Like we said, we understand that people don't want to be inundated with lots of databases, geospatial information. So what we've done is we put the data into a web app. So this isn't a web app that's designed to be open to the general public. This is a web app that's designed to be open to the stakeholders involved in the project. So Kat, I think we've sorted her a login, but she's not had a chance to have a play yet. But we're going to sort out logins for the guys at Alton Energy, at Pecan, and obviously at CES as well. If you want logins for this, you're more than welcome. But what this lets you do is kind of interact with the data as you would if you were kind of on Google Earth. So we have done a bit of extra analysis here to sort of say, look, these red sites are in the national park, they're not suitable, and some of these other red sites up here, they wouldn't be suitable for other reasons. But if I kind of zoom in, you can see we've got the mapping data underneath it. We can put imagery data on if you prefer the imagery. I'll leave the mapping on for now, but you can click on a land parcel in here. What it'll do is it'll bring up the nearest Google Street View. So you can kind of take a bit of a look at the site on Google Street View, but then all that information is in here as well. So you can see not in the flood zone, not in the green belt, not in a national park, and all that data's in there and available. And what you can do, let's say Ollie clicked on this site and looked at it, he could add a comment in here, say, yeah, Ollie looked at this on the 11th of May. Would be nice to go and look at in person, or I suggest this could be a usable site. Add that as a comment, and then if Liz looked at it the next day, you'd see Ollie's comment and you'd know that he'd already looked at this and he'd made some comments about it, and his thoughts would be retained in this comments box down in the bottom left. What we've built into here as well is a gazetteer. So if you've got a postcode, if you've got a site in mind and you've got the postcode, this search box up at the top, I don't know any Hampshire postcode, so I won't put one in, but you can put in a postcode up there and it will zoom into that postcode, and you can look at the sites directly there. So that's your kind of your site search option. How do you zoom into a site straight away? Put your postcode in there and you can zoom into it. And you can switch the layer off and on and just look at the mapping and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of the land use mapping, but the rooftop solar data is in here as well. And again, we've coloured this green and red. Apologies to anyone who's colourblind. We do this every time, but green and red always just seems a good option for good and bad and stop and go, doesn't it? But the green buildings would be suitable for solar and the red ones would be unsuitable for solar. But what we've built in here, again, is if I click on a property, let's just choose any one. It'll zoom to the nearest Google Street View window, but all the information will be brought up there. So 104 Greenfields Avenue, and all the solar information is in there. And again, you could add a comment in so that other users can see that you've done that. If you've got a property, you can type in an address. It might not go right to the address because the gazetteer is not 100% accurate, but it'll get you close enough that you can then pinpoint the roof yourself and identify it. So all that information's in there. A couple of quick bits that we are developing and we could deploy to this platform in the future. We are developing an export so that you could export as a database information from this. So you could say, okay, show me all the solar suitable roofs just in postcode. I live in Leicestershire, so LE9 would be my postcode, and you can export those as a CSV, and you would just have a database then of all the solar suitable roofs in one postcode. The other thing we're doing, which we'll hopefully deploy to the platform over the next few weeks, is individual property or individual site reports. So you could click on a building, you've got your Google Street View, you've got the information there. But then if you were to click the export to PDF button, it would put that into a nice one-page PDF that says, this is 8 Tilney Close, it can have 4 kilowatts of solar on it. Here's the little picture of it, here's a map, and that's nice for putting in a report or taking it to the site to sort of enhance that conversation.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you now, Ian, because we've got loads of questions and we haven't got much time. So I'm going to, first of all, I want to open it up to Katrina or Kat Kat, have you got anything you'd like to add about your experiences or how you feel community energy groups, because you've started to work with this, and I know you haven't yet been able to use the actual portal, but is there anything you'd like to say about what your vision is, or how you see community energy groups can use this sort of information in the future, and other things you would like as a community energy group to make this easier to use? And I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear Kat? No, none of us can hear you. Still can't hear you. Right, while you sort that out, I'm going to suggest perhaps Danny Lee might be able to say something, or somebody else you've been working with who maybe has better access to making himself heard.
Yeah, I can hear you. I'll wait. I'll sort of fill the space whilst Katrina sorts herself out. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the maps that we were getting for PCAN are absolutely brilliant. So, what else would we wish to see in these maps? Well, I was just exchanging views with Anna of Winchester City Council, and I'm just wondering, is there going to be a pull across to the local plans, for example? Will they inform the local plans as part of the planning stages for that? And can it be put onto a website for anyone in the public to use? Because it's a push-pull thing, isn't it? It's not just for a community energy group or climate action network to do this. We need to do the top-down, bottom-up approach. So that's the sort of question that, or views that I would have initially.
Okay, thank you. And I'll put that to Ian and also to Steve, because I'm also curious, and some people have said, can the maps be linked so that you can show where the grid is constrained? And Ian's nodding vociferously, but I just wonder if, yeah, I'll just put that out to both Steve and Ian to respond to.
Yeah, I mean, to answer Danny's questions first, yeah, absolutely. We've done this kind of analysis now for a few local authority areas. You know, whole of Oxfordshire is one of our biggest. And they are bringing that data into the local plan and using the local plan to influence our analysis as well. So yeah, absolutely, that's part of the process. In terms of publishing the data, there's a couple of considerations from our side. The first is where we get some of the source data from. Are they happy for some of their bits to be published online? Usually yes, with the right credits and that kind of thing. But if I'm going to be, I'll put my very selfish commercial hat on here for a second, even though we're a community energy webinar. It is as a business that's here to make money. Do we want to put our data and our products out for all and sundry to see? We do. Is the answer, and we're looking at this again in Oxfordshire at the moment with the view of actually there's a lot of information in there that not everyone would be interested in. If you want to have a look at your own property, for instance, you might want to just see the stats that say, is it suitable for solar? How much will it cost? And how much CO2 will I save? And how much money will it make? So yeah, we think that's absolutely possible with the right kind of truncation of the data and protection of some of the core elements that are commercially sensitive. But yeah, absolutely something we're looking at and we're really keen on as well, because I think of when Google Earth came out, everyone in the mapping industry went, oh no, everyone's just going to use Google now. But actually that fostered this kind of thing saying, well, I saw this on Google. Is there anything better? Is there anything newer? So it really kind of stokes the innovation in the industry as well, doing that kind of thing. So we are keen on that. In terms
so I'm going to hand over to Kat now.
Oh, right. Yeah, I was just going to say quickly on
and then over to Steve to carry on answering that question. Let's see if we can hear Katrina now.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I've just sorry, I had to leave and rejoin for some reason. Yeah, so really excited to use this program. We're a Petersfield Climate Action Network and Autumn Energy were able to put some priorities for data mapping, and that included looking at south-facing rooftops in East Hampshire based on projected income compared to current energy consumption. And we just want to share that widely. We can use those details to go to give it presentations or and to set some targets for a business plan and use that information to go to councils to say, you know, this is a great way to reduce a carbon footprint. Then we looked at high energy emission locations, which residential and commercial buildings were particularly high energy users. And then again, we can target particular properties and owners with that information, and again work with the local council to do that. And then the other thing that was mapped, and sorry, because I haven't had a real chance to play with this, Ian has gone through it all, but we looked at mapping EPC ratings of D and below. Energy Autumn are doing a lot of work with energy efficient housing, and PCAN with the Super Homes Project, National Energy Foundation. And it's just about having all that detail to share with others, and yeah, and a business plan for community energy. So for me, to have that detail, to give a presentation to a school and say, we could use your rooftop and we can save you this much money and it can be this efficient, it's just going to be really helpful, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Katrina.
Can I just add to that very quickly? And I think the points about South Downs versus non-South Downs National Park was very important and powerful given the constraints. So, you know, more achievable outside the South Downs National Park. So that would then allow Katrina and myself with the ESD to look at the priorities of where we push hard, where the opportunity is, and more realizable.
Right, there were loads of questions and I've got slightly distracted. So I've got a note. Tom Broughton had a couple of questions. I think one of them was for Steve, and I don't know if the other was for Ian, but I'll hand over to you, Tom.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Just about.
Okay. Okay. Steve, I believe in ED2 there's going to be an intention to communicate with local authorities about their plans. How is that going to be implemented, and who should we contact if we want to progress it?
Okay, so that's going to be done through essentially digital tools. So we're exploring various different tools. We've got an innovation project. I put a link in the chat in response to your question, actually, of a project called Resop. We've been doing that with Dundee local authority, and we've done a lot of it with Oxfordshire as well through the Leo project. And that's essentially allowing two-way information about the plans which are going through the in terms of development in the local areas to be uploaded so we can ingest them, and it's similar to what we do currently with DFES, but equally being able to share slightly more granular information and versions of what I've shown you today, so that can be agreed and developed together. One of the tools which we're exploring is a prototype done by Advanced Infrastructure called LEAP Plus. And that's been funded through Innovate UK project, essentially called Meta Apps. So that's modernizing energy data applications is the what that stands for. And that's essentially being able to share that information in a geospatial way and then do joint decision makings off the bat of it. So essentially it's going to be through digital services and the data exchange off the back of that.
And how can I progress that?
So that will be part of ED2. So that will be going online probably towards the end of 2023.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions? There were loads in the chat box, and Danny, go ahead.
Yeah, a question for Steve. Had a scenario back after Storm Wallace, living in the rural beyonds of Winchester, and I'm sure it's the same for East Hants. When the storm took out the overhead power supplies, those of us who were fortunate enough to get onto heat pumps and electric vehicles were completely and absolutely stymied. This is sending the wrong message to those who are sitting on the fence and want to get on the right train to decarbonize and do the right thing. So really, no one's talked about it. What is the plan by SSE to move from overhead supply to ground supply to improve the resilience? Because we all know with climate change, these extreme events are going to happen. And of course, the issue is with community energy. And if we can't store the energy and we're connected to the grid, we're going to have to stop generating, because if the grid goes down, we're stuffed. So, there's a whole big issue there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an area where resilience more generally is considered in a lot more detail. First up, to say that undergrounding it isn't necessarily always the right option. It's very expensive, and the amount of investment that would be required and the amount of disruption that would cause is significant. So it's not going to be lots of undergrounding. That's just simply not going to happen. But there are other ways to improve resilience. And that's using a slightly different protection setup in terms of a localized generation as well. So things like, if it's obviously during a storm at night, solar isn't great. But if you do have solar and you do have local battery storage in your home, ensuring that that can run in islanded mode, in other words, being able to self-supply and that side of stuff, that can help. Equally, understanding what's connected to the grid at any given time and faster restoration times is something we're targeting too. It's something which we're also thinking about for EVs, and that people being isolated and being able to share where there's local charging networks which are still online, so that can be charged up, particularly if they're set up at home where you can back generate from your EVs into your home as well. Obviously, in those sorts of storm situations, we keep an eye on all the vulnerable customers, and we ensure that they've got supplies there. And actually, we do have mobile generators, which we've run out for those particular individuals as well. Under ED2, again, we've got a whole area where we're looking to engage specifically with our vulnerable customers to ensure that they've got all the services they need. And vulnerable customers go from people who've got young children, people who are blind, people on dialysis. It's a whole range of different levels of vulnerability. So yes, we're very conscious that people become a lot more reliant on us. And obviously, if you fast forward to 2050, there'll be no gas. So even it's that sort of backup side of stuff. And of course, probably solid fuel would be looked to be phased out as well. So yeah, it's an area we're very conscious of.
Thank you. Roger Davies, you had a couple of questions, so I'll hand over to you. And then I was going to suggest Vicky Matthews has a couple of questions too.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I've actually got another question that I didn't put on the chat, which I'm going to ask first. It's for SSEN. One of the key things that we have as sort of fairly early stage local group have identified is that a big barrier to introducing community scale generation is the fact that we would have to sell electricity into the grid at a fairly low rate, and the consumers would have to buy it back at market price. I know that people have started looking at sort of local schemes which would allow a better price for generators and a reduced price a reduced price for consumers. Is there anything SSEN are doing in that field?
So we actually in the UK have a disaggregated energy system. So we look after essentially the wire and manage the energy running through the network rather than sell and buy electricity. Suppliers essentially do that. So in terms of being able to sell electricity as such, you'll need to go to your suppliers and set up a PPA to do that. In terms of the broader sort of concept, it's something that Ofgem's been considering around essentially it's called peer-to-peer or local energy or sleeving. It's got several different words and terms associated with that sort of concept. And there is a little bit of resistance behind it, purely because if you extend that concept out, all the people who can start selling locally and using their local generation. The community groups who have more affluent areas be able to sell that and take advantage of it. A good example is where EV owners, obviously more affluent families and people, were able to essentially charge their EVs and be paid for it because of the market price at that given time if they were on the Octopus Agile tariff. That very much leaves the least well-off, least affluent people who can't engage essentially picking up the bill for the rest of the electricity system. So the view being, as the cost associated with the electricity system, the transmission system, all that side of stuff, when you scale it, you've got Mrs. Miggins in Aberdeen who can't afford to buy her EV, and she gets left to pay for the rest of the electricity system. Obviously,
I can see, sorry, I don't want to monopolise the conversation here, but I can see that there would need to be a charge for the provision of the network capacity.
Yeah.
But what we're looking at is a sort of peer-to-peer type thing, and in fact the projects we're considering would actually be supplying cheaper electricity to some of the social housing areas in our village. So I can understand the argument you put forward, but I think it's a really key part. And I would have thought that the distribution companies would also be in your interests, because you would have to spend less money on upgrading the network to cope with the switch from gas to electricity.
So slightly different concept when we start using peer-to-peer as a flexibility service, where you shape your demand to best fit those other demands. And that is something we're absolutely looking at. And that's something we're developing as part of our LEO project in Oxfordshire. And that's around where we pay for services for people to change their behaviors to fit requirements on our network. But that isn't paying for energy. That's a different concept.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Vicky Matthews, you had a couple of questions.
Yeah, it was just a couple of general points, really. Thank you. I do live in the South Downs National Park, which is also an international dark sky reserve, a really important status. The point I wanted to make was the visual impact of solar farms. Now, we have this vast conurbation, and I understand the desperate need to supply energy, but people also need precious green spaces. What about the visual impact of solar farms? They're taking away green space. Does it have, are there mitigating implementations to make up for the loss of this visual green space? And what about grassland wildlife and ground nesting birds? So are those sort of things taken into consideration and taken seriously?
I'm going to put that, I don't think that's necessarily a question for Stephen or Ian to respond to, so I'll put that out to the group. It might be something that Martin or Ollie could respond to, or Danny.
Well, all I would say, agrovoltaics is something that has been used in other countries. I'm not sure I've seen that used locally, where rather than industrialize the countryside, you might get a mix crops with the solar cell arrays. Of course, that changes the cost, the business models and the costing profiles. So it's tricky, but I agree. You know, nature-based solutions is something we need to consider, given that's the double whammy, isn't it? Decarbonisation and biodiversity.
Yeah, and I think we also really do need to be mindful of people's well-being and mental health, and that this sort of creeping urbanisation and industrialisation of the landscape could at some point have a really detrimental effect. And I realise it's a difficult balancing act between the provision of energy and reaching, you know, a net zero target, but we also need to be mindful of the price tag that might come with that in terms of well-being.
So Ollie?
Thank you, Vicky. It's such a good point, you know, across the board. I think solar farms, I've seen a report that solar farms is about a third of, you know, 0.5% of land or something along that. Golf courses are 2.5% of land in the UK. So, you know, we could look at using golf courses for things like this, but which are heavily mowed and others, sorry. But I think the point on South Downs National Park and the visual impact is that they've got a planning notice around renewables now that they put a lot of weight towards visual impact. And what we need to balance for rural communities, particularly in South Downs National Park, is that it's considered. You can put a solar farm in, or a small solar farm in fields where it can't be seen, you know, that's balanced to a rural community and you know, almost never seen. I walk around the countryside quite often and I come across, you know, I was at Farley Farm recently, which is, you know, one of the Charleston farms, and they've got a 50 kilowatt scheme mounted in a field that I only happened about because I could roughly see where it was, so I went to go and look at it. So I think if they're very carefully sited, and if communities want them, then that helps in local people buying into them. So, you know, that's why community energy is so important, because it comes from the community side. But whereas if it's a big solar farm that's imposed upon a community, then it, you know, there's a balance to make.
Can I also add in a bit on the list on that?
Martin, yes, please do.
Yeah,
I know you've got a question too.
Yeah, we've got to be very sensitive about where we put solar farms, without a doubt. And, you know, there are issues there. And, you know, I think the other question we need to consider is how many solar farms do we need? And quite honestly, I think given the level of energy we need to generate from PV, we probably don't have to put too many or any in areas of outstanding natural beauty or in national parks. But that does mean we do need to concentrate solar farms in areas which are not areas of outstanding natural beauty and are not solar national parks. So we need to look at where else can we put solar panels if we can't put them in areas of outstanding natural beauty and in other sensitive areas. So I think that's the issue to me. Is look, we probably don't need to put too many solar farms, or indeed any, in these sorts of areas. There's plenty of other land space, as Ollie pointed out, you know, perhaps covering 1 or 2 golf courses, which may not be popular, by the way, but we don't have to do that. There is enough land in certainly southern UK to provide the solar PV resources that we need without having to start putting them in national parks.
Thank you. Did you have a question, Martin?
Yeah, I did, but perhaps on a slightly, yeah, okay, I'll ask it now in that case. Yeah, this is one for Steve, really. I think today's presentations have been brilliant on looking, if you like, the supply side. Yeah, where can we find the sites for solar PV, for instance? I'd like to extend that into wind farms at some stage as well. So this has been really good on the supply side, but I think there's a question on the demand side. You know, is how much renewable energy do we need? Now, I say this is a question for Steve, because I'm working with Basingstoke Council at the moment to develop an energy strategy. So what we're trying to do is almost go building by building, site by site, looking at what demand there will be for electricity over the next 20 to 30 to 40 years as we electrify transport, electrify heat in particular. And it seems to me there should be an input from that, from SSE, because the grid is going to be vital to this. And if we're going to build an energy strategy for Basingstoke, which is what we're trying to do, and on a bottom-up process, you know, as I say, almost house by house, but not quite that detailed, which is going to answer the sort of basic questions like how much solar PV will we need in Basingstoke to meet our needs? How much wind will we need in Basingstoke? How much anaerobic digestion, etc. But the question to Steve really is, how do we bring SSE into that conversation? Because it's going to be absolutely vital that we understand the grid consequences of building, if you like, bottom up, very detailed local energy strategies.
And before you answer, Steve, and I'm sorry, and I'm really conscious it's 11:30, Vanessa has a question that we'll add to, is of a similar ilk. So, Vanessa.
So my question was, does the DNO have a view on how much we should be generating in this country using solar for each of your scenarios?
So that's an easy one. Yes, that's what's in the spreadsheets, and we've broken that down per primary substation, so to quite a granular level. So yeah, that information is there. If you look at the overarching analysis report, that we've basically got that summarized at our southern license area level. If you want to just quickly dip in to see that. Going to Martin's question, so within our calculations, we've got it down to a relatively granular level in terms of the amount of EV and heat pump, and we go down to our secondary substation level for that calculation. So that's about 400 homes, roughly. So essentially 4 or 5 streets typically. And in a sort of an urban area. Obviously, when you get up to rural Scotland, it's a slightly different situation. And that gives an idea of those particular uptakes of demand. We have the larger levels of demand as well, in terms of things like industrialization, but obviously a lot of that information we get from the local authorities, so it becomes a little bit cyclical. It needs to be done carefully, and it's kind of alluding to some of the joint planning which we were discussing earlier, making sure that we are sharing and exchanging information and then we can use it mutually. So obviously having a little bit of discussion around how we can engage with my colleague Steve Atkins engages with several local authorities to help support this. And actually at the moment, most of our sort of engagement in this area with our local authorities when we are creating our DFES. We talk to all the local authorities as we build that up through Regen. So yeah, if there's a more specific conversation which needs to go beyond that, then that's obviously something we can facilitate if necessary.
That would be very useful for us, because we got into the stage now where we want to be able to say, look, we're beginning to understand what the demand for electricity will be in the scenarios, and we're actually using those scenarios as your scenarios or the future energy scenarios as a basis. So we know broadly what the demand might look like in Basingstoke and how that might evolve over time. The next step is to say, all right, if that's the sort of demand we need in Basingstoke, how much of that has to come from ground-mounted solar PV, how much from roof-mounted PV, how much from local wind farms, how much from local anaerobic digestion? That's where we're getting to in our thinking. Because I think that's going to be critical, because we've got to persuade the people of Basingstoke that if we're going to have a carbon-free world, then we have got to develop local renewable energy, and from my point of view, local community-owned renewable energy. But it's going to be quite big. I mean, the very rough numbers we're coming up with is we can get about 90 megawatts on the rooftops of Basingstoke of solar PV. But we're going to need about 250 megawatts of ground mount in Basingstoke. Now, that's going to be quite a lot. We're going to need something like 45 to 50 megawatts of wind farms in Basingstoke. But if we can't, we need to get our planning authority, i.e. Basingstoke Council Planning Authority, on side with this, because at the moment they turn down almost all large renewable energy developments. Indeed, our local plan in Basingstoke actually prevents the construction of wind farms in the district. But we need to get them past that barrier and say to them, look, in Basingstoke, we are going to need 45 megawatts of wind farm. We're going to have 300 megawatts of ground mount. We're going to have 90 megawatts of solar PV. But how do we get to, I need the basis of that. And it'd be great if we could work with someone with SSE to do this bottom up local plan that says, this is what we're going to do in our district. So I don't know if you want to be party to that or get involved in those discussions.
So the data behind the DFES has all those projections down to the primary level. So it's a matter of carving up that data for each of the scenarios. Unfortunately, we don't have data more granular than that. So that's a bit of a gap.
I think we could probably work with that. And that's that spreadsheet you showed us.
So there's another spreadsheet which sits behind the report, which I didn't show you because that's something you need to request. I've just shown you things which you can find on our website specifically.
I'll see if I can request that then, because that might be incredibly useful. Thanks for that. Apologies for taking too much time there, but it's important for us in Basingstoke. And hopefully the work we're doing here could be rolled out into other districts, by the way.
It sounds really good, actually. I'm very conscious of time. People are leaving because, you know, we were supposed to finish at 11:30, but I see we do have a couple of more questions. So I just want to check with our speakers if you're all right or if you need to go. You all right, Ian?
Yeah, I'm all right for another 5 minutes or so.
Okay, and Katrina, because we haven't really heard from you, but are you all right to stay on for? Okay, thank you. So Danny, you've got another question.
I just wanted to respond to Martin. I entirely agree with Martin that we need this information, but I think we need to be careful about the one-dimensional approach, and it's been mentioned already, and this is the nature thing. So in the local plan or somewhere, I mean, South Downs do this quite well. They have ecosystem service maps. We need to understand what the natural capital benefits are for climate change, people, and society. So if you're going to take a piece of land and you're going to industrialize it, we need to know what the offset should be. And the environmental impact assessment process in planning is suboptimal. So there is a real need to fix this to get the balance right. Otherwise, you're not going to get the communities on side because they're going to make the same points that have already been made today. It's a real concern.
Thank you, Danny. That sounds like a large piece of policy work for perhaps Solar UK to look into.
I think so. It's the missing ingredient, I think, to success.
Okay, thank you. That's really useful. We'll have to figure out something to do with that. Does anyone else have any questions or observations? It's been Lynn from South Harting. Good, a new voice, wonderful.
Lynn from South Harting. I'm new to this area of expertise. In fact, I'm amazed by all of you. I'm an architect based in the South Downs National Park, so I'm used to their restrictions, shall we say, and also very mindful of the need for mental health, well-being, and all of those good things. But I think that we have to remember the IPCC report. And to me, to hear people from, to hear Stephen from SSEN say with full confidence 2050 just rips my stomach out. I can't see how there is a realistic relationship to the time frame of urgency. But setting that aside, how long does it take for, if we were to find somewhere that could be a suitable site, what is the time frame for SSEN to be able to say, yes, we can take that electricity, we can put it in our wires? What's the reality of getting something designed and SSEN can get it out to the people?
So you're talking about a connection, the connection process, essentially.
Yeah, how much can, I mean, I had a brief conversation with Tom recently, and my understanding is that, are you prepared for all of this sudden, renewable electricity?
So yes, that's fundamentally part of our next 5 years of development. That's why we've put in a £4 billion ask from Ofgem for those next 5 years, essentially. And that's all built into our essentially our business plan for our next how to work going forwards. So yes, we've got quite a lot of work we need to do in terms of being able to facilitate that due to the sheer quantity. So that's a combination of obviously upgrading our network, but also using flexibility to manage the network more appropriately as well. Obviously behind the scenes, we've got a lot of work around digitalization, ensuring that we share data appropriately so everyone can see that. And we've got the right tools to be able to make the best informed decisions. So it's a huge amount of work to basically facilitate that. Just to pick up your point about 2050, 2050 is just the end target date. We have projections for every year up to 2030 and then 5 years after that. So we're very much thinking about how we get to 2050 rather than just using it as a target. Yeah, I do confess that in terms of the responsiveness of our connections teams, they're not the greatest, and actually they're a little bit behind some of our other distribution companies, but we're in the process of overhauling the processes they're doing and getting more people in those departments as well to make it a little quicker and to help facilitate that. We're also wanting to use a lot more automation for smaller connections. So simple things like the rooftop solar for small properties and connecting things like heat pumps as well and EVs. That should all be facilitated using automated processes. So yeah, huge amount of work. And we're aspiring to be a lot more responsive across those areas.
Thank you. Ian has a question. And you've just muted yourself, Ian.
I've been quiet all the time. I made a comment. I don't like solar farms. I drive around the country, see them next to the road. I think they're ugly, but they are a requirement. But since the feed-in tariff went, the domestic rooftop has collapsed. But we're Hampshire, and we live in an area where there's massive tourism. And Stephen will realise this, is that for electric vehicles, if people coming down in years to come, you're going to need a massive charge. Where's that going to come from? We have two, South Downs and the New Forest National Park, but they're stuck in the 1990s. I wouldn't dream of putting solar panels on my grade 2 listed building, but within the curtilage of the building, of the land, you have outbuildings. Why can't, they need to relax somewhat to be able to put solar on there so that people generate their own electricity, don't suck from the grid, and so that we can meet future demand. It's currently at about 35 gigawatts when you look on Grid Watch. We're going up, they need to get up to over 50, National Grid said, when we have electric vehicles. We can't possibly do it unless we come together and start moving things forward, discussing how we can move things forward. That's a statement, not a question.
That's not really a question, is it?
No,
But good point.
I just feel it just needs to be put out there. It's not being.
And that's kind of the point of these sessions, really, so that we can all get a bit clearer about the things that are needed and work and find ways to work together and bring new people in to contribute and learn.
Thank you.
Yes, Lynn.
On that point, because I'm completely new to all of you, forgive my naivety, as you said in the beginning, just welcome naivety. I'm really anxious to get South Downs National Park to change, to be flexible, to say, yes, in the curtilage of a listed building, there is no reason not to put solar panels. So is there an arm of this group that is about action, is about trying to make things change?
Ollie, can you respond to that? Because we've worked with South Downs National Park.
Lynn, that's music to my ear. Yeah, I've literally on Monday this week, I was talking to South Downs National Park exactly about that, is how we can start working with them to create an activity hub where for this work, for community energy, and to really dig into what will work for all the communities in South Downs National Park. So if you and I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. So have we got each other's emails?
Yeah, I think so.
You can pop your emails in the chat box so you can each see each other and download the chat at the end.
We sat next to each other at an amazing event at South Harting. Chris and I came away just enthused for weeks after that. So congratulations in South Harting, by the way.
Yeah.
It's really good.
I'll put my email in the chat and now I'll be quiet.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Sylvia, I'm sure there is. I've just seen your message and I'm just going to answer here. Yes, of course. In fact, do you want to raise your Wiltshire issues here in this group? Because there are so many experts here, they may be able to help you out.
Yes, sorry, we've started a very small group in Bedwyn looking at setting up a solar farm, but I don't seem to be able to communicate well with Wiltshire, or maybe I'm just pressing the wrong buttons. Wiltshire Council.
Is there anyone here who is from Wiltshire or has worked with Wiltshire? No, okay, all right. Well,
talk to Wiltshire Wildlife Community Energy.
I will do. I'm actually a trustee of Wiltshire Wildlife and I am starting to talk to them, but I haven't managed, I've been away, so I haven't managed to do it quite yet, but I will do. Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't talked to them for a little while, but certainly I think they used to be very well connected, or at least some of the people on the board at that point used to be well connected.
And I think there's two community energy group, or one community energy group in Wiltshire, the West Mills group, aren't they, in Wiltshire? They put a community wind farm in and a community solar PV farm.
Don't think it's in Wiltshire, but I'll investigate.
Okay. It's near Swindon.
It's sort of Swindon area, so it's kind of pretty close if it's not actually within Wiltshire.
Okay, good point. Thank you.
So Sylvia, what's your question to connect with community energy groups in Wiltshire?
Really, I mean, we're part of Wiltshire Climate Action Group, but it's not focused on community energy in the same way that you seem to be moving forward very fast from Hampshire westward. So I just wondered whether or not I was missing we were missing a trick, and whether or not.
Well, see, what we're trying to do is work with the county councils.
Yeah.
And really focus on the strategies. So very happy for you to drop us a line, and Liz will probably put her email in the chat. So, but the thing is, at the moment, I am urging community energy groups to get in contact with your district and borough authorities, to the economic development teams and your climate change officers. Now, this is important because the community, the levelling up funds and the devolved funds coming from government are going to the districts and boroughs, and they are targeting community cohesion and skills and future. And community energy aligns perfectly with that. And so literally what we're discovering is that the districts and boroughs are realizing that community energy needs to fit into that they need to have conversations with the community energy groups. So that the climate officer, or even better, go to the economic development teams within the councils.
I will do some more digging. I've obviously just been pressing the wrong buttons.
And if anybody wants help on that, email us and we'll show you a presentation and things like that and connect you.
Okay, well, we've got 20 participants, and Steve needs to leave. And Steve, thank you so much for your presentation. I hope it was very useful. You've got little bits of clapping there. So thank you very much. Does anyone, Tom has, no, Tom's doing clapping as well. Thank you, Tom. Are there any further questions, or shall I close the group? Shall I end the call? Right, it looks, was that? It looks like we're done. Thank you so much, everybody. I think the next one is about flexibility aggregation and peer-to-peer selling, but I can't quite remember. Anyway, we will email you and keep you informed. And I will, once this recording is complete and converted to an MP4 file, I'll stick it on YouTube and send you all the links. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and do email me if you have comments about what would be helpful, what you'd like to learn more about, and what works and what doesn't work for you, because obviously these sessions are there to engage and help people move forward and take action. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Liz.
Cheers, Ollie.